There's a moment that stays with you forever. You're sitting across from someone who raised you, someone you've looked up to your entire life, and they say something you know, deep in your bones, is wrong. Maybe it's outdated. Maybe it's harmful. Maybe it's rooted in a worldview that no longer fits reality. And yet, you stay quiet. You swallow your words. You nod, even as everything inside you screams to speak up. This isn't cowardice. This isn't weakness. This is something far more complex, something woven into the fabric of how we're raised, how cultures shape us, and how the human mind learns to navigate power, love, and survival all at once. This is the psychology of respecting elders, even when they're wrong. And if you've ever felt the weight of that silence, if you've ever struggled between honoring tradition and honoring truth, you're not alone. Because this tension lives in millions of people across the world. It shapes families, it influences careers, it can even determine who we become. But here's what most people don't realize. This isn't just about culture. It's about psychology. It's about attachment, conditioning, power dynamics, and the deep unspoken contracts we make as children just to feel safe. Let's start with a question. Why do we respect elders in the first place? On the surface, the answer seems obvious. They have experience. They've lived longer. They've survived challenges we haven't faced yet. In traditional societies, elders were the keepers of knowledge, the ones who knew which plants were poisonous, how to predict the weather, when to plant crops, how to survive. Respecting them wasn't just polite, it was practical. It was survival. But there's a deeper reason, one rooted in psychology. From the moment we're born, we are entirely dependent on older people. Our parents, our grandparents, the adults around us, they are our world. They feed us. They protect us. They teach us how to speak, how to behave, how to exist in society. And because of this dependence, our brains wire themselves to see authority figures as essential. Psychologists call this hierarchical attachment. We don't just love our elders, we learn to defer to them because for a child, disagreeing with a caregiver can feel like a threat to survival. Think about it. A 2-year-old doesn't question their parents' rules. A 5-year-old doesn't challenge their grandmother's stories. A 10-year-old rarely debates their teacher in front of the class. Why? Because children instinctively understand that challenging authority could lead to rejection, punishment, or abandonment. So we adapt. We learn to respect, even when we don't fully understand. We learn to obey, even when we quietly disagree. And over time, this conditioning becomes so deeply embedded that it doesn't just disappear when we grow up. It follows us, it shapes how we communicate, it influences how we handle conflict. And it creates one of the most painful dilemmas of adulthood. What do you do when the person you were taught to respect says something you know is wrong? Now, not every culture handles this the same way. In many Western societies, individualism is prized. Children are encouraged to think for themselves, to question authority, to form their own opinions. Disagreeing with a parent isn't just tolerated, it's sometimes expected as part of growing up. But in many other cultures, particularly in collectivist societies across Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America, respect for elders isn't just encouraged. It's mandatory, it's sacred, it's woven into the moral fabric of society. In these cultures, there's often a concept called filial piety. The idea that children owe their parents and elders unwavering respect, obedience, and care, not because they were always right, but because of who they are. It's not about merit, it's about role. This means that even when an elder is clearly wrong, even when their advice is outdated or harmful, challenging them can feel like a betrayal, not just of the individual, but of the entire family, the community, the ancestors who came before. Imagine growing up in a household where every major decision, from what you study to who you marry, is influenced by your parents and grandparents. Imagine being taught from childhood that speaking back to an elder is disrespectful, that raising your voice is shameful, that even politely disagreeing can bring dishonor to your family. Now, imagine you're 25, 30, 40 years old, and your parent tells you something you know is factually incorrect. Maybe it's about health, maybe it's about relationships, maybe it's about the way the world works. You have the knowledge, You have the evidence, but you also have years of conditioning telling you that correcting them is wrong, so you stay silent. And that silence, that internal conflict, can feel suffocating. But here's what's fascinating from a psychological perspective. This isn't just cultural programming. It's also about power dynamics. Elders, by virtue of their age and position in the family hierarchy, hold social power. And challenging power, even gently, requires a level of psychological safety that many people simply don't have. Research in social psychology shows that people are far less likely to speak up against authority figures, even when they witness something wrong, if they fear social consequences. The famous Milgram experiments demonstrated this. Ordinary people were willing to administer what they believed were dangerous electric shocks to strangers simply because an authority figure told them to. Now, apply that to family. If people will obey a stranger in a lab coat, imagine how much harder it is to challenge someone who fed you, raised you, and shaped your entire worldview. This is where the psychology gets deeply personal. Because respecting elders, even when they're wrong, doesn't just affect how we behave on the outside, it affects how we feel on the inside. Let's talk about cognitive dissonance. This is the psychological term for the discomfort we feel when we hold two conflicting beliefs at the same time. On one hand, you believe your elder is worthy of respect. You love them. You're grateful for what they've done for you. On the other hand, you know they're wrong. You see the harm their belief could cause. You recognize that their perspective is limited, outdated, or even dangerous, and so your mind is split. Part of you wants to speak up. Part of you feels like you can't. And this internal war, this constant tension, can lead to anxiety, guilt, frustration, and even resentment. Many adults who grew up in cultures that emphasized strict respect for elders report feeling trapped. They describe sitting at family dinners, listening to opinions they fundamentally disagree with, biting their tongue so hard it hurts. They talk about the exhaustion of constantly suppressing their true thoughts, of performing agreement just to keep the peace. And here's the heartbreaking part. This doesn't just affect their relationship with their elders, it affects their relationship with themselves. When you spend years silencing your own voice, you start to question whether your voice even matters. When you're taught that your perspective is less valid simply because you're younger, you internalize the belief that your thoughts aren't as important. Over time, this can erode self-confidence, decision-making ability, and even identity. Psychologists call this learned helplessness. It's what happens when someone is repeatedly taught that their actions don't matter, that they have no control, that resistance is futile. Eventually, they stop trying. They stop speaking up. They stop believing in their own authority over their own life. But it's not just about silence. Sometimes the pressure to respect elders, even when they're wrong, leads to the opposite extreme. Some people rebel. They push back hard, cutting off family ties, rejecting tradition entirely, building walls between themselves and the generation that raised them. And while this might look like freedom, it often comes with its own pain, guilt, shame, the nagging feeling that they've betrayed something sacred. Because no matter how wrong an elder may be, there's still love there. There's still history. There's still a part of us that longs for connection, for approval, for the acknowledgement that we're still part of the family. So whether we stay silent or we rebel, the internal conflict remains. And that's the real struggle. Not just the disagreement itself, but the cost of navigating it. Let's be honest about what this actually looks like in real life. Picture a young woman who wants to pursue a career in art, but her parents insist she become a doctor. They believe it's the only path to stability, to respect, to success. And because she was raised to honor their wishes, she gives up her dream. She spends years studying something she doesn't love, building a life that doesn't feel like hers, all because saying no felt impossible. Or think about a man whose father insists on traditional gender roles, who dismisses his son's desire to be a more involved parent, who mocks him for wanting to share household responsibilities with his wife. The son knows his father's views are outdated, but he doesn't argue. He just quietly resents the judgment, and that resentment builds year after year until the relationship feels hollow. Or Imagine a teenager who knows their grandmother's health advice is dangerous, rooted in superstition rather than science, but they can't convince her to see a doctor because questioning her wisdom is seen as disrespectful. And so, they watch helpless as her condition worsens. These aren't hypothetical scenarios. This is the lived reality for millions of people, and the costs are real. Research shows that family conflict, particularly when it's rooted in cultural expectations and generational differences, is one of the leading causes of chronic stress. And chronic stress doesn't just affect mental health, it affects physical health. It weakens the immune system, it increases the risk of heart disease, depression, and anxiety disorders. But beyond the individual, there's a broader cost too. When entire generations are taught to silence themselves in the presence of elders, societies lose out on progress. Innovation slows, harmful traditions persist, injustices go unchallenged, because change requires voices, and if those voices are taught to stay quiet, nothing changes. So what's the answer? How do you respect someone you love while also honoring your own truth? Here's the truth: there's no perfect solution. But there is a path forward, and it starts with understanding that respect doesn't have to mean blind obedience. Real respect, mature respect, is about holding space for someone's humanity while also recognizing their limitations. It's about honoring what they've given you, their love, their sacrifices, their wisdom, while also acknowledging that they don't have all the answers. This requires a shift in thinking. Instead of seeing disagreement as disrespect, we can learn to see it as dialogue. Instead of viewing our elders as infallible, we can see them as human, flawed, shaped by their own upbringing and limitations, just like we are. And here's where psychology offers us tools. One of the most powerful concepts is compassionate assertiveness. This means speaking your truth, but doing so with empathy. It's not about proving someone wrong, it's about expressing your perspective in a way that preserves dignity for both of you. For example, instead of saying, "You're wrong about that," you might say, "I understand why you see it that way, and I've come across some different information that's helped me think about it differently." Instead of, "That's outdated," try, "I know things were different when you were my age, and I'm navigating a world that looks a little different now." This isn't about being manipulative. It's about recognizing that people are more likely to listen when they don't feel attacked. And when your goal is connection, not just being right, this approach can open doors that confrontation would slam shut. Another tool is setting boundaries with love. You can respect someone and still say no. You can honor their role in your life while also making your own choices. The key is to do it without anger, without guilt, and without apology for being your own person. This takes practice. It takes courage. And it takes unlearning years of conditioning that told you your voice doesn't matter as much as theirs. But here's the beautiful thing. When you start to reclaim your voice, something shifts. Not just in you, but sometimes in them too. Because when you speak with confidence and compassion, when you show that disagreement doesn't mean disrespect, you model a new way of relating. And sometimes, just sometimes, even the most stubborn elder can soften. Not always, but sometimes. And that possibility is worth reaching for. The psychology of respecting elders, even when they're wrong, is one of the most universal struggles we face as human beings. It's the place where love meets limits, where tradition meets truth, where who we were raised to be meets who we're becoming. And if you've ever felt torn between honoring your elders and honoring yourself, know this: you're not weak. You're not ungrateful. You're simply human, navigating a complexity that has no easy answers. Healing doesn't mean abandoning respect. It means redefining it. It means understanding that the people who raised you are imperfect, just as you are. And that true respect isn't about agreement. It's about seeing each other fully, limitations and all, and choosing connection anyway. So if you're that person, sitting across from someone you love, holding your tongue, carrying the weight of silence, let me say this: your voice matters. Your truth matters. And finding the courage to speak it with love, with compassion, with respect for both of you, that's not betrayal. That's growth. And in that growth, imperfect, messy, brave, you honor not just yourself, but the very people who taught you what love looks like in the first place.